So I'm Brendan. You guys might know me. I'm the coordinator for Bird Friendly London. Really thrilled to be hosting this webinar, which is sponsored by Nature London. And we're really lucky to have Dr. Leanne Greaves here today to talk to us about her involvement with the Society of Canadian Ornithologists Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, or EDI committee. It's a really wonderful time to be engaging in this kind of work, and SEO has been a phenomenally active and proactive organization when it comes to EDI research, and particularly with an emphasis on making bird watching spaces more accessible and equitable and inclusive. So I'm going to hand it off to Leanne. Feel free to leave questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. We'll get to those at the end, and I'm looking forward to a discussion afterwards. All right, over to you, Leanne.
Thanks. Okay, just another check. The screen share is proper and audio is okay? Great. Perfect. Yeah, so I'm really happy and excited to be here this evening. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really just gonna, I guess, well, maybe I won't just jump right in because I have a few introductory things I'd like to say first. But I'll start out, well, let's see if my screen will advance. Okay, I'll start out just giving a bit of an outline on what I hope to cover today. There's quite a few points. I really broke it up, but I think each section will be relatively quick. So because I'm coming to speak today as a representative of the Society of Canadian Ornithologists, but also because I am a researcher and a biologist who works with birds, and like Brendan, and I'm sure some of you at home, I live with birds as well. So I wanted to frame some of this discussion through this lens of birding. So I'll start out by giving a brief history of birding in North America, very, very brief and incomplete. And then kind of use this to digress into why diversity matters. A little bit of thoughts on how we can diversify. Then I'll introduce everybody briefly to the current Society of Canadian Ornithologists Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, or EDI committee. And then the sort of meat of the presentation today will be to talk about what we've done so far, how our organization works, to try to give a little bit of understanding of how we interact with the SCO, or Society of Canadian Ornithologists, more broadly, how we're doing in terms of how effective and what impacts our efforts might be having so far, and then a little bit of a look at where we're headed before we go into a Q&A. So I hope to not take more than 30 to 40 minutes to talk. So I'm going to really try to be brief, so there's a lot of room for discussion at the end. But before all of that, I wanted to start by giving a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements, I think, are really a first step. They're kind of, when it comes to reconciliation and reparations, they're in some ways the least we can do. And a big purpose of the land acknowledgement is to recognize the land as an expression of gratitude, and to gain a sense or reflect on our appreciation for those whose territory that we're living on. And it's also a way of honoring the Indigenous peoples who have been living and working on the land for generations and generations, thousands of years. And this also, I think, has a really creates an opportunity for us to appreciate the unique role and relationship that we have with the land. And it reminds us to consider the long and rich histories of the land and how it's a privilege for us to live here. So London, where most of you are likely tuning in from, is on Treaty 6 land, and that encompasses the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Lenape, or Lenape as they're sometimes referred to, I think in both ways. But here in Hamilton, where I'm hailing from today, this is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. And this territory was under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. And this was an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations. And it was meant to encourage and sort of bind everyone to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And so for anyone who hasn't seen this wampum belt, I hope my cursor is visible, but these two purple rows, I think, are really the crux of this wampum. And they represent, on the one hand, the indigenous societies traveling along the waters in their canoes, and the European settlers or colonizers traveling alongside in their boats or their ships. And the idea of these parallel paths is that the colonizers and the indigenous folks should share the space, traveling in their own separate worldviews and paths, and respecting one another's ways, while also caring for the land. And I would say that in terms of settler communities, we haven't really done a good job of upholding that relationship. So those are just a few ideas to think about, I think. But I also want to introduce you to myself. This is more of an academic kind of introduction, just to give you a little bit of an idea about my background. So I'm from Manitoba originally, and I did my undergraduate studies at the University of Winnipeg. For the bird folks in the audience, I worked with red-winged blackbirds. Then I moved here to Hamilton to earn my master's degree and traveled to Puerto Rico to work with smooth-billed awnies. These are a really amazing bird that I like a lot. I took a year to work for Wildlife Preservation Canada in the Carden, Ontario region, north of Toronto, and I worked with the endangered eastern loggerhead shrike. And then I moved over to London, Ontario, which is where I met Brendan, and did my PhD working with song sparrows in 3 different parts of southern Ontario, London, north of Kingston, and just outside of Cambridge. And I also, through all of this sort of academic background, I've done a lot of teaching with different age groups, from kids to university students. And right now I'm a postdoctoral researcher at McMaster University, and I've been working again with smooth-billed awnies and with a whole bunch of other songbird species as well. But beyond all that, I'm also, of course, a regular human. So I'm sure, like many of you, I love spending time in the outdoors. I do a lot of hiking, cycling, birding, and I have a couple of other sort of weird hobbies like playing music and doing combat sports. So that's a little intro to me. And now we'll jump into talking about themes and issues related to EDI. And so, as I mentioned before, I wanted to sort of use birds to talk about these issues. So on this slide, I'm just highlighting a few of the well-known early European ornithologists who came to North America as explorers and as naturalists. And something that becomes readily apparent if you look at the history of birding in North America is that, you know, it was very Eurocentric, it was white male dominated, and their approach to ornithology and to natural history tended to be to just shoot everything, collect it, ship it back to Europe, and have it categorized. So this was a very particular way of understanding the world. Of course, there are also some European white women who were involved in birding in North America, although they often went under unrecognized or under-recognized and very often unpaid. But what I think is really interesting here from a diversity perspective is that many of these early women ornithologists had a different way of understanding birds and nature as a whole. So they were much more likely to be involved in things like conservation and rehabilitation. And they really emphasized the importance of observing birds and the natural world rather than just killing things. So they were really interested in living relationships compared to some of the early male ornithologists who had traveled to North America. And so I think this is really interesting to think about, you know, what are the ways that men and women of European descent in North America differed in their approach to ornithology? Which of these ways might be more closely aligned, for example, with indigenous ways of understanding and knowing nature? How do they differ? And what different views might non-white settlers have brought? And why don't we have very much access to their stories and their experiences? And one thing that I want to highlight that I think many people will be familiar with is that this legacy of exclusion of some groups in favor of others certainly does contribute today. And it's across the whole environmental sector, as well as the sciences and many, many other industries. And so that's why I think a lot of the work that we're trying to do is super important. And we can see some of these, really ugly quotes that if anyone spent any time on Twitter, women are still being told things like this in 2023, unfortunately. But I'd rather emphasize a more positive note where we can think about how when communities are more diverse and more equal, we will have a much healthier society and a much better experience overall, I think, for everybody. So I've already touched on why diversity is important, but there are some practical benefits and some business or sort of corporate benefits that we can think of with diversity as well. So there's quite a bit of research demonstrating that diversity leads to stronger governance, better problem solving, more creativity, and increased profits for companies or for organizations and for science. And that's because having diverse teams means that you've got a lot of different people bringing their own perspectives, ideas, and experiences. And this allows for the creation of resilient and effective organizations and programs that tend to outperform groups or teams that don't invest in diversity. So there's a clear financial productivity and sort of practical benefit to diversity, but it's also just, of course, the right thing to do. I think we can all intuitively understand that it's wrong to exclude people based on their characteristics. And so again, to tie this back into birding, we know also that birds are facing multiple threats. A lot of these pressures are caused by anthropogenic change, and this includes climate change, habitat loss, development. And by bringing together diverse teams, for example, in conservation, we're much more likely to come up with creative ways to solve these complex conservation problems, for example, that birds face. And another element is that birds have become so popular, they're so well loved, that they can really provide a gateway for people to really become interested in nature and conservation. And so it's really important, I think, if we want to protect and preserve nature and biodiversity, that we're including as many people as we can so that we can be more effective in our efforts. So the more that communities engage in birding and conservation, the stronger their resolve is likely to be to improve conditions for birds and also their habitats. And as I already mentioned, if we diversify throughout the environmental sector, we're much more likely to solve these really big and important problems. And it's crucial that we should do that, just using birds again as an example, but since 1970, across North America, we've lost about 25% of all birds already. And again, these are these big challenges that it's really important to have diverse groups working on. And so with this slide, I really just wanted to highlight some really amazing people who I either know personally or admire from a distance, who are themselves diverse people in ornithology, but who are also doing really great work in terms of outreach and efforts to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in ornithology and often in science more broadly as well. And I wanted to kind of summarize this with this quote from Drew Lanham, who is a professor at Clemson State University in the US. He's also a writer and a poet. And he says that he didn't meet another Black birder until he was well into his 40s. So I'm turning 40 next year. And I think Dr. Lanham is probably about a similar age where he could be my parent. And, you know, to me, it's unthinkable that I might have spent my whole life up until now not seeing anyone like me doing, you know, the hobby that I love the most in the world. So I found that to be a really powerful quote. And I also just thought I'd highlight his book, The Home Place, which is a really nice memoir about the love of nature and the relationship that many of us have with nature. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is affinity groups. These are typically spaces that are reserved for folks who identify as being members of a certain kind of typically marginalized or underrepresented group. And these are really important spaces because they provide a place where people can come together and have a sense of community and feel like they belong and feel comfortable. And even though as nature societies, you know, nature-based organizations, we often feel, well, of course we're inclusive. I wouldn't exclude anybody. Everybody is welcome. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, and it's not enough to just know that for yourself or for your organization. It's really important to create these kinds of spaces that really offer this opportunity for people to be with similar folks and start to feel more comfortable on their own or with their own affinity group, and then hopefully expand outwards into joining other organizations that historically probably have been less diverse. So this is one way to kind of help make space for people to get involved and feel comfortable. And there's all kinds of really great programs that already exist. And of course, I wanted to highlight that Nature London and Bird Friendly London have already been doing some really nice work putting together these pamphlets of Indigenous Anishinaabe bird names. And starting to bring in people from different backgrounds to what has often been a very white-dominated hobby, that is birding. And I also wanted to highlight the Freed program. And this is a training program specifically for students who identify as Indigenous, Black, or racialized. And it provides hands-on ecological field skills and training. And the reason programs like this are so important is because underprivileged groups often haven't had the same access as more privileged groups have had to things like volunteer internships or training opportunities. And so we often need to work a little harder to get folks who haven't had the same chances as us up so they can have a similar level of experience so that we can all build that success together alongside one another. So that's one of the big differences between equity and equality. Sometimes we need to give more to certain groups who have had less so that we end up all benefiting and all having equal access moving forward. And so how do we diversify? These are just a few ideas. They're certainly not the only things that we can do. But one thing that I think is quite simple to do as an organization is to be really explicit and have a diversity and inclusion statement on your website, on your outreach materials, or whatever's relevant for your organization. And again, this is just an example, but it goes back to that idea that we often have where we feel like we're inclusive. We know that we want to be inclusive, but sometimes it's really helpful to just come right out and say it and let people know that you want them there, they're welcome. And just put it right out there. I think that can go a long way to making people feel comfortable to walk into a space where they might not otherwise feel that way. And again, this goes back to the idea of the affinity groups, creating safer spaces for folks from underrepresented groups. So hosting walks that are led by members of historically and currently marginalized groups, such as, for example, again, just giving birding, but it could be anything, having Indigenous-led walks, having walks for women, trans, and non-binary folks, and so on. And again, with reference to the Freed program, that training piece can be really important so that we can train folks from underrepresented groups so that they have the skills they need to become leaders in these fields, so that we can get that diversity throughout our organizations. So I think this is common in many organizations, but certainly thinking about the sciences in academia, where I mostly live these days, we know there's a lot of diversity in the undergraduate student body. And as we go through from graduate students to postdocs to professors and faculty to the upper administration, we lose that diversity. And it's often because we're not providing the training and support that folks need to retain them within the system. So training and other opportunities are a few of the most important ways, I think, to do that. Fundraising is another really nice way to diversify. Again, using the birding example, folks from marginalized groups often have less access to resources. So providing equipment available to borrow for people to use can be a really nice way of bringing everybody in and giving those opportunities to folks who might not have them otherwise. And something I think that Nature London and Bird Friendly London has been really great at already is just to continue inviting speakers and experts from underrepresented groups. So I won't really go on about that, as I know that you've already been doing that. So thank you. And another piece is to consider who has leadership positions. I've already touched on this, and I'll touch on it again when I talk about the Society of Canadian Ornithologists and how we work. The leadership is often lacking in diversity, and it's really important to think about, is there someone from a marginalized group who can lead, and how can we resource or support those people to lead and to succeed in those roles so that they want to stay involved, and so that we can really, again, even out that diversity throughout organizations. So now I'll move on to sharing basically what the EDI Committee for the Society of Canadian Ornithologists, or SCO, has been doing for the past 2 to 3 years. So this is the current membership of our EDI committee. You can probably see just visually that we are lacking in diversity across some axes for sure. Although it's important to not assume that we know someone's, for example, racial background, ethnic background, or gender just by looking at them. But there are some ways, even as a committee, that we could be more diverse as well. But we are a volunteer-based committee, so we bring on board who we can get. But this is just to kind of introduce you to who we are this year. Some of our past and also founding members are named here at the bottom. And so what have we done? One of the first things that we decided as a committee would be really important to do is to gather information about our membership demographics and to understand what the membership might want from the society. So our most recent records at the time had shown that we had 265 members, so we're quite a small society. And we thought really hard about how to put together this membership survey. We wanted it to be comprehensive enough to be useful to us, but also short enough that members would be likely to complete it. So we had 13 questions plus 1 open-ended space for feedback. And I'm not going to show you all of the survey results, but I'm going to give just a few highlights. And I realized after the fact that my math here, 77, oh, right. So we had 82 responses, 77 of those were in English. So we had a few responses in French because we do try to be a bilingual society, although we are very Anglophone dominated. And then 12 of those 82 responses were from former members. So all in all, the results of this survey were based on about 26% of the membership at the time, which is actually not too bad as far as surveys go. But it's important to keep in mind that the results were based on only about a quarter of the membership, not the whole membership. And so again, here's just some highlights of what we found in our survey. So first of all, about half of our members considered themselves to be established in their career, but we had a pretty big chunk, 40% or so, of people who are students and early career. And so it was really important for us to think about how we can support those people who want to have a career in ornithology or who are pursuing their career goals. How can we support them and provide opportunities to them as a society? While also, maintaining the interest of nearly 50% of our membership as well. And then we had a pretty big spread in age, but I would say that probably the 35 and up categories are likely representing, for the most part, the established career members. But we had a fair spread in age, although we are lacking in younger members, which perhaps isn't too surprising, as folks under 24 often would still be doing, an undergraduate degree, and they may not be aware of our society or have much need to join a professional ornithological society at that age or at that time in their career is a better way to say it. And then we wanted to look at the ethnic backgrounds of our members. And we a priori predicted that we would be an overwhelmingly white organization, and we are. So we found that 88% of our members identified as white, with just a handful of other members identifying as coming from any other sort of ethnic background. So that really speaks to us to the need to diversify the membership of our society, because we know that ornithologists aren't 88% white people, of course. So clearly our membership does not match the broader population, and that's a problem. We also found, again, probably unsurprisingly, that about 80% of our membership identified as straight, or members, I don't know why I put air quotes, sorry. But basically these are folks identifying as part of a gender or sexual a majority sexual orientation. So that would predominantly be heterosexual people. But we had about 17% of our members, or maybe closer to 20 if you put in the unsure category, who identified as members of a minority sexual orientation. So again, we wanted to think a lot about how we can support those folks and make sure they feel included in the society. Most of our membership identify as cisgendered, so someone who's born female and identifies as female, someone who's born male and identifies as male. But we do have some members who identified as otherwise, so perhaps being non-binary or transgender. So we have a very low diversity in that gender identity axis of diversity. And then we had about 9% of our members who identified as having a disability. And we gave examples, I think. No, I'm sorry, we did not give examples of what a disability might be. We did have some people responding saying they didn't really know what that meant. So for perhaps in a future iteration, we should give some examples. I'm not sure. But again, we really, I think, should be thinking about, based on this 9, almost 10%, how we can make sure that our society is accessible for folks who identify as disabled or who are disabled. And then because we had those 12 respondents who were not currently members, we asked them why they didn't renew their membership. So most of them said they primarily joined for travel purposes, travel to the annual conference that the society hosts, and that's pretty typical, so we weren't really very worried about that. But what really stood out to us is that about 58% of the responses indicated that members at least partly didn't renew due to a lack of perceived value, benefit, opportunity, or inclusion in the society. So again, that's something that we really want to change. And so, as I mentioned before, we did give the opportunity for folks to leave feedback about how we could improve and better retain their membership in the future. We didn't get very many responses to this question. I'm not going to list all of them, but I'm synthesizing the major points. And I also want to highlight that we got one negative comment. We had a comment where someone told us that we should just focus on the science and the birds and stop trying to be woke. I don't think that's a productive comment, and I don't think it's useful in any way, really. because we can't just do science, we can't just do birds if we're not also considering how the way that we operate is impacting our society and the people around us. So of course, we need to focus on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So from the constructive comments that we received, some people indicated that our society is quite academic and research focused, and it is. And they suggested that we should include more practical and applied foci or information or activities that would be more relevant to our members who might work in industry or in the environmental sector, or who aren't, acting researchers or academics. So that's a really fair point. Some people indicated that we should improve our outreach and advertising for the society. And some people mentioned that our efforts to increase representation of ornithologists from underrepresented or minoritized groups was really good. But of course, minoritized groups most need funding and resources, so they need access. And so that's something that we're aware of and that we're really focusing on now. So what have we done? There's a lot of information on this slide. And the next slide too. So the next two slides are really just a laundry list of the things that we've done since we formed our committee. But the pink bubbles are meant to sort of highlight what axis or what part of what the membership wanted that we were trying to emphasize with these tasks. So we really focused on increasing our social media presence so that we could engage better in outreach to our members. We ran a series of features on social media where we highlighted the research of ornithologists who come from minoritized groups. So we were increasing representation. We also developed a terms of reference for our committee so that we would have some guidelines for how we wanted to operate and function. And we drafted an ethics statement for the society as well. And that's something that's an ongoing process still. But these were ways that we wanted to make sure that we as a society could be accountable to our values. And then we started a whole series of activities. This is not just the work of the EDI committee, but these were some of the ideas that we had and that the Executive Council took up. So we have monthly networking events for affinity groups. These are for folks who identify as being LGBTQ+. We have a workshop series where we cover a lot of different topics, again, trying to focus on some of those more applied or practical topics that membership said they would like to see. We developed a mentorship program for ornithologists, typically at the university level. So there's a mentor-mentee program that we have that's been quite successful so far. And so those are some of the ways we wanted to increase the opportunity and value of being part of the Society of Canadian Ornithologists. And then we went through and updated the language on our website and on some of our award applications to make it more inclusive. And as an example of this, the old writing of one of the awards said he/she. And that excludes folks who don't identify as either he or she. And so we changed all of those to just say they. They can do this, not he or she can do this. So that was just a very simple change that includes everyone. We also were able to donate some money to the Freed training program that I highlighted earlier. So we really wanted to support that program because it's really fantastic. And really importantly for our society, we were able to put together an annual student award to support minoritized ornithologists. So those are ways that we were putting funding in for underrepresented groups as per some of our membership feedback and as per our own goals. And we also tried to increase engagement with our membership by having various contests. And right now we're working on putting together a membership report to highlight some of the results of the membership survey and some of the changes in membership that we've documented since, so that we can be really transparent to our membership and let them know, where we're at, how we're doing, and where we're headed. And then we're starting to have conversations like today with other organizations so that we can try to increase our impact too. So next, I just wanted to share a little bit of the practical side of how our committee works. I know that Brendan mentioned earlier that we've been really active and we've received a lot of questions about how we've managed to get so much stuff done. So some of this might not be relevant or applicable for all organizations, but I think some of it will be applicable for groups like Nature London or Bird Friendly London, because I think these are somewhat smaller groups, much like the SCO is. So this is, you don't have to read all of this, but it just gives you an indication of who the Executive Council is right now. So there's about 15 members or so. Members of the Executive Council, as well as regular members of the Society, like myself, serve on various subcommittees. So there's a whole variety of them. And I've just highlighted ours, the EDI committee. And one of the other things I wanted to highlight that's been brought up by council is that the council is not particularly diverse either. So the leadership is lacking in diversity, that problem I've mentioned a few times. So they consulted with us on how we might work to remedy that. And we came up with a few ideas. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but one of the things we thought of is that when it comes time to elect new members to council, those leadership positions, we recommended that the society really just make an explicit statement saying, we want to diversify our leadership. Here's what we're looking for. You know, we would like you to join us. Encouraging self-nominations, so not relying on people to be nominated by someone else, but encouraging people to nominate themselves to join, which is quite an awkward thing. So it's nice to have encouragement. Asking senior leaders to encourage early career researchers to apply. So sort of putting that self-nomination encouragement thing together. So if someone else can tap somebody and say, hey, I think you'd be really great for this position. No, it's not weird. You absolutely should apply. We can get probably more diverse applications to join council. And again, because we know that we have more diversity in lower levels of experience, typically, we thought that the council should encourage graduate students to join. So it's usually just those established career researchers who are part of council, and that often tends to be the group that's lacking in diversity. So we thought that was another way. But how we get so much stuff done is really based on the fact that we have a very sort of easy flow between the subcommittees and the Executive Council. So essentially, our EDI committee meets monthly. We take a break in the spring months when a lot of folks are doing field work. And we discuss, you know, what we think we should be working on, what are some ways that we think we can make the society better. We brainstorm and come up with plans, and then we simply email those to the council. And then they'll come back to us saying, sure, go ahead, or yes, okay, we'll do that. We need to find a volunteer. Or they might say, that's not feasible for this reason. How could we, you know, work it out or do it differently? Or maybe it has to be something that we put on the back burner, or maybe we need to do more fundraising first. So we really just use our committee meetings to have ideas, to follow up on projects, and then we email the council. And then we have a conversation back and forth until we can identify the action item. And that will either be that the council will take it over or that the EDI committee will take the lead. So for example, one of our EDI committee members, Cesar Estado, proposed this mentorship program. He brought that proposal to council. Council loved it. And now a couple of the council members are on the mentorship subcommittee, and Cesar is sort of consulting as a regular member on that project. And so we work in different ways. For example, the EDI committee interacts with the awards committee because we wanted to change the language and make a new award, which was something we just proposed to them. And then they told us how much money that they could put together towards that award. As a committee, we helped write the application, the terms of reference and the language for the award, and so on. So we really just have this open communication. And I think that's what helps us get so much done. So how are we doing? And I'll close off with this. So these are some figures that were put together by a master's student at the University of Manitoba, Lee Sutcliffe. And she really just took a look at some of the membership. Oh, sorry, my mouse was off. Lee Sutcliffe. I don't know what I was waving at before, sorry. So she took some of our membership data from the point at which we had already initiated some of our projects. So something I forgot to mention was that we have a free membership program. So members of minoritized groups, whether they're disabled, sexual or gender minorities, or racialized, people who are Black, Indigenous, Brown, people of color, however they might describe themselves, can apply for a free membership. We had already done the membership survey, and we had already done some fundraising for EDI efforts. So there probably was some change in the society that we weren't fully able to measure. That's not represented in this figure. But moving on, in early 2022, we introduced these affinity groups, these monthly social hours for members of underrepresented groups. We created the mentorship program and the workshop series, and we saw about an 18% increase in our membership who self-identify as being from underrepresented communities. So we think that these efforts are having an impact for sure, which is really exciting. And then just to orient you to the other part of the graph, the Society has an annual conference, and a lot of people tend to join the Society because they get a discount in registering for the conference. So we also saw a 28% increase in our membership, mostly due to the conference, which was virtual. So that's, I think, what's meant by accessible in this case. And again, a decent portion of those new joinees, again, self-identified as members of underrepresented communities. So we do think that our work is having an impact in diversifying the society. And I'll close off just by letting you know sort of where we're headed in this year. And again, this is just a little bit of a laundry list of things that our committee has identified as being important for us to focus on this year. So the workshops have been really popular, and we want to continue having them. But we also want to have some different kinds of workshops that might touch on issues to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion, safety, doing field work, because field work isn't equally safe for everybody. We'd also like to have more education on that piece to make sure that folks who tend to have students in the field or lead research teams in the field are aware of the dangers that some people might face with field work, so they can be better supervisors and make sure folks are feeling safe and are safe. We want to increase engagement from the membership, especially members who might not really care about EDI issues. So we don't have the answer for this, but how do we reach the person who said we should stop being woke? How do we get them to understand that this is important? I don't know the answer, but that's something we want to work towards taking a crack at. We also want to create for our website a living resource list so that anyone can log in and look at various opportunities in ornithology, whether it's funding or jobs and so on. We'd like to, as part of the mentorship program, have some kind of lunch program so that mentors and mentees can have a paid for lunch coming sort of back into in-person events. We think it's really important for people to be able to connect face to face. And with that, we would like to do more fundraising so that we can have more activities, especially when it comes to our student award. Something that I think is worth mentioning is that the other student awards that have existed for quite some time in our society are $1,000 annually, but there was only enough money to establish this new award for minoritized ornithologists at $500 annually. So our goal will be to get enough funds to make that also a $1,000 award, and to have funds for these other activities as well. And another thing I just wanted to highlight is that we should do these membership surveys periodically so that we can continue getting those demographic data so that we can understand, again, how are these projects affecting the society membership, and keep updating ourselves on what the membership wants. So those basically are just ways we want to continue adding value, opportunity, resources, and promote inclusivity, and also be accountable as a society and to our membership. So I've blabbed on for a really long time. Sorry about that, but I'll leave it there. I think Brendan's going to stop recording for the Q&A, and I'm very excited to answer any questions or have that conversation now. So thanks very much.
Great presentation. Thank you, Leanne. That was really excellent. I'm looking forward to opening this up to Q&A. If it's okay with the group, I thought I would just take a couple of minutes, if I can, and offer a little bit of perspective on EDI in the London context from a birdie point of view. Bird Friendly London has been generously supported by Nature London in the last few years, and we've done a fair bit of EDI-centered work. So maybe just to start off the discussion, if it's okay, I thought I would just share a little bit about things that we've already been working on. I'm trying to find the slot to share my screen. Here we go. Okay, this should be brief. Promise you won't get 2 talks in the span of one. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you're probably aware that London's population is growing. And I want to also highlight that the student population in London has been historically large and is also growing. We have a lot of young people here, and increasingly, we are, I think, seeing more young people reaching out because they want to feel more connection with the natural world. People are concerned about the decline of nature. So how do we tap into this and bring these young people into the fold of existing naturalist organizations and other environmental groups that have existed here for some time? Bird Friendly London has undertaken a number of initiatives in the last few years, really aimed at improving equity and creating access to bird watching for people who don't otherwise have those tools and information. So for example, earlier this year, we worked with the London Public Library to distribute free bags of bird seed to low-income families and to people experiencing homelessness to encourage them to learn a little bit more about birds and what is and is not safe for birds to eat, recognizing that they might not otherwise have access to those tools or knowledge. Nature London, through Bird Friendly London, helped to contribute pairs of binoculars that are available for anyone in the public to borrow from the London Thing Library. So if people are maybe bird curious and want to try out a nice pair of binoculars and see if birding is for them, they can do so. There's 5 pairs at the Thing Library, and the Thing Library offers discounted memberships for low-income households. We held a seed fund initiative last year where we basically gave away stuff. We said, hey, if you are from an equity deserving group, if you'd like to receive a bird feeder and some bird seed, supplies for treating your window, or even supplies for starting a pollinator garden, let us know. And we received applications from a number of organizations that work specifically with those equity deserving groups. We are now circulating these Anishinaabe bird names pamphlets. These were acquired from Birds Canada. They're going downriver to First Nations, Oneida, Chippewa, Munsee, Delaware. And one of the producers of these pamphlets was Joe Pitawanakwat, who Leanne mentioned, and we actually hosted him for a webinar on names for birds that was sponsored by Nature London as well. And that's on our YouTube channel in case you missed it. We've tried to do some more deliberate targeted outreach through birdwatching hikes made available to low-income neighborhoods. So we tried this out last year with the Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center in South London. We had limited turnout. It was the first time we tried something like this, but the staff there were really appreciative and gave us constructive feedback. We'd love to do more of this kind of targeted outreach in the future. So it's not just the folks that are already really embedded in birding communities, but newcomers that might be interested to go for a hike with knowledgeable new friends. And I want to also point to this section of our website and end here. So I get a lot of inquiries from people who are like, hey, I'm new to London. I'm interested in birds. You know, what do I do? Where do I go? And I often send them here as a starting point. This is a page all about bird watching, and we provide the information for different types of birders. So you're going to have some advanced birders, but you're also going to have people who are new to birding, so beginners. There are people who might have a disability or need specific accessibility accommodations. And that information about where they can go birding birding is not always clear. And in particular, we have information for new Canadians. So here's what I mean when I say accessible birding. There's this section on that page, and I've only highlighted 3 here. We're hoping to add to this as well, but I've listed the accessibility features for 3 different areas in London. We don't have a ton of accessible spots for bird watching, to be honest. This is a room for improvement in the municipality. And the degree of accessibility differs from site to site on a number of factors. Here's information on birding for beginners. Sorry, you'll probably hear there's a parrot screaming his head off in the background. I figured it would happen. People who are new to birding might not have access to knowledge, so it's all compiled here for them. And then birding for new Canadians, we offer resources with language translations, names of birds in commonly spoken languages here. So I'm going to end it there and ideally mute myself. I think there's some really cool opportunities now in London, given all this interest in birds and bird-friendly city, to really expand the breadth of what we're doing and who we're servicing and bringing into our community. And I'd love to hear questions from the group or ideas for how we can carry on this work in London moving forward. Thank you. So I'll open it up for questions now. Feel free to leave ones in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you.